Hello, this is a video on the chant of Ulysses, the 26th of Inferno of Dante Alighieri, in which some main themes can be seen and exposed through Ulysses' journey. So we will consider some of these points to show a reading which uses the anagogic key to understand the Divine Comedy, as Dante himself suggested to do when he proposed his opera. Let's start from the fact that Ulysses is the prototype of this desire to know beyond any kind of limits of wisdom, and it ends tragically. It is a bit different from Homer's Ulysses, because somehow Dante identifies with Ulysses himself, and with his search for truth, but the main point is the way in which this search, the spiritual search, can be made, if with God's grace or by man's will and power. So Ulysses comes from the tradition of the Greek, in which he was a sort of a hero of mental capacity and treachery, sometimes fraud also, using the mind as a tool to overcome difficulties rather than force. So he is in hell, punished with those who have used in an evil way their mind, and more deep than the violent people. They are more near so to Lucifer, and to its gelid action on the bottom of hell, which is to freeze the waters that at the beginning are so hot. You remember maybe that in Flegetonte, one of the rivers of hell, the water is boiling really, and about in that area there are areas in which fires are coming down from heaven, for example on Capaneo, which is dominated by this excess of heat. At the bottom of hell, on the contrary, we find a frozen area, which is Cochito, in which the souls are sort of not able to move at all. We have a similar representation in the Buddhist wheel of life, in which of the various lokas, 6 lokas or reigns, that the god of time or death, Yama, holds in his hands. One of these is the area of demons, which have 8 hot and 8 cold hells where they reside. The other reigns are one, of course, those of men, and below this are the area of spirits and of animals, besides that of demons. Above man's reign, we have semi-gods and gods. Only the few liberated ones are able to go beyond um, the spell of time. So, coming back to Homer, Dante knew his works only indirectly, because the Greek works were lost in his time. And so, through Virgilio and through other Roman writers, he had translations. And the way he was seeing heroes of Greece, and also the figure of Circe, which is almost at the beginning of the chant, an important figure, a sort of anima figure, was flowed by the fact that they were seeing this in a more tragic and negative way. So it was a Christianized way of seeing as a sin for man to become as God. It takes a little bit us back to the fact that Adam himself was guilty of this same kind of sin, wanting to know good and evil, that is the fruit of the tree which was planted in Eden. And this arrogance to want to know everything, to know the everything, the all, the God itself, to become like God, knowing and becoming was the same thing, was the reason for which he was exiliated from Eden, following the snake's advice. So it's somehow as if Ulysses wants himself to know everything and to become a superman, to find his superior nature, but he does this through a particular way, which now we will further analyze. To start with, Dante and Virgilio meet Ulysses in a double condition. He is in a flame with Diomedes, and Diomedes was the one who helped him to steal the palladium from Troy, which is one of the reasons for which the city ended its capacity to resist, because it was a sort of a protection, and that was done through treachery, like the history of the horse, of the wooden horse in which the warriors were hidden, and other deeds that he mm, is known for. Being such a smart guy, he helped, for example, to find out where Achilles was and have him with them in the Troy War. But he's not really punished in hell because of these fraudulent advices, because this is the area where this kind of sin is punished, but rather because he sort of cheated God himself, going beyond the limits that he had posed for humans to um, stay behind. This is expressed in the fact that after he leaves Circe, he goes to the Pillars of Hercules and goes beyond them. We will come back on this very soon. Let's say something about Circe. Circe is said in the tradition to be the daughter of the sun and of the moon. She's a particular kind of woman. She's a sort of deity. Ulysses himself is the grandson of Hermes himself. When he meets Circe, it's because in his journey after Troy to try to go back to Ithaca, and because of Poseidon's opposition, he was landing in so many different places. One of these was in Italy, in the south of Rome, where Circe was living. And Circe is considered in Homer's story almost like a goddess, and she actually helps Ulysses and his mates to stay in a sort of suspended paradise for a whole year, but does not resist the fact that Ulysses wants to take on his trip again. And she helps him in so many other ways. So the tradition, which was in Dante's time, was much more negative about Circe. It saw Circe as a sort of a negative woman, which with seduction and sorcery was sort of impeding them. This is not really so true. In fact, she used to transform people in animals because they had an animal part probably in them, but she agrees to take these transformation back, and so his fellow mates were again men. And also she conceives a son, Telegono, with Ulysses, which is said in tradition to have then, at the end, killed his father, not knowing that it was his father in Ithaca when he was looking for him. This is at the end of the story. But then, after he left the Circe, so he somehow brought Circe with him, and this fact that she was a sorceress anyway, that a sort of person who knew the forces and the ways to bend them uh, on the dark side of uh, power, as we would say in modern saga. So he was sort of going with this mm, black soul with him towards his further damnation. He was somehow damnated even before damnation, because his will was to use all this power to go to the end of his will. The more he goes towards um, these pillars of Hercules, this is what he starts in his recounting to Virgilio and to Dante, in telling them the story. He says that he left Circe and that he visited so many places which were inhabited by so many other world beings in the Mediterranean. He got to this doorway, to this gateway, which is the pillars of Hercules. It is said that Hercules posed these pillars so as to indicate that this was the extreme western gate that should not be trespassed by any man. And being the strongest of men, Hercules said by this sign that no one could do more than this. But Hercules is said to have mm, mastered the main energies that live in us since he was a newborn. You know from yoga physiology that it is said that there is a force of the universe that constructs the little body of a newborn child in the mother's womb, and when the body is completed, she would sleep coiled like a serpent, like a snake, at the base of the spine in 3.5 spires, closing with her mouth the central channel of the subtle body, who is called Shushumna. And so while she is dormant in this coiled way, like the dormant beauty, that's probably consciousness in that condition, she maintains the activities of human life, physical and psychical and relational life, until the body ends his life. And then in that case, she ascends the subtle centers, the chakras that express this energy in everyday life. She ascends the chakras and goes through the upper chakra, the seventh one, back into the universe, into the general Shakti. But the part of Shakti that is present in the physical body is called Kundalini, which means the coiled one. Well, why do I say this? It's because Hercules was said when he was almost a newborn in his cradle that he mastered, that he choked 2 snakes, and that is indicating that he was able to master these energies since the beginning. He was sort of a semigod actually, and he became a god at the end. So this superior knowledge we're talking about was that this gate, which is the 2 pillars, and which you have to go through passing in the middle, are a place where you go into another kind of experience in another world, which is beyond all limitations and all identifications of consciousness. This kind of reading, the anagogic reading, is important to understand why this reference to this gate between the small sea, the Mediterranean, and the big sea, the ocean, is such an important point. So, going through this gate, Ulysses says, we went leftwards towards the land which is unpeopled and where the sun sets. Actually, the west is where the sun sets, where the light goes down. It is the reign of darkness. And it is also leftwards, meaning the side that goes towards darkness, and also southwards they go through the equator to go and meet the mountain of purgatory, which, as you know, is on the other opposite side of hell. This journey to the left side, so, is already a downward journey, and it seems to Dante that this could be a sort of witless, of crazy, of mad deed, because it is the same problem he had in the second chant of Inferno when Virgilio proposed to him to go to the height of heavens, and Dante says, but I think that this is something that has been done by Enea and has been done by St. Paul, but those were journeys which were decided by the sky, by God himself. I'm afraid that if I decide this, it could be considered something sort of sinful, negative. I cannot decide such a thing. And in that case, Virgilio reassured him that this was not a problem, because actually it was Beatrice that had asked for this journey, and she had come to him in the limbo. And so this is how Dante decides to move on. He goes back to his previous enthusiasm, and he says, okay, then my will and your will are one now, and I consider you my guide and my master. That is why when Virgilio then passes the door of heaven. Even then Dante also passes, because they are one. The master and the disciple pass together. This is not what had happened at the end of the first chant, when, even though Dante was willing to go and Virgilio was going before him, that was not really the beginning of the whole trip. It was only at the end of the second chant, after he goes beyond this problem. Who is deciding the journey? Am I deciding to go, or is God asking me to decide this? So the fact that this is a trip to the left side and toward the darkness takes us back to the fact that it could be a sinful deed. The fact that it is unpeopled also is interesting, because it means that no one is there, no person is there. It is a place which is a sort of a desert. The same situation we had found again when Dante, at the beginning of the poem, comes out from the dark forest, and he sees a place where there is a hill and there is the sun on top of the hill. But the first thing he does after he comes out from the forest is to look behind him to see what kind of limit he had, of border he had trespassed. And he says about this, no living person had ever come out of this. So he's also saying in that place that he is not identified now anymore with a person. Being a person, being an identity, means being separated and probably unconscious of itself. Becoming conscious is the main point in the first whole part of the opera. And so seeing all the identifications until the Lucifer identification, which is the first part of the process. The second part is that once you renounce to Satan, to the devil, you have to make an effort with the goodwill. And so it's as if you visited a globe from inside and from outside, getting to the same central point and going beyond the two, the oppositions of the lower and the upper, and synthesizing this in going beyond to paradise. But this will be explained better in another video. So the fact that this world is unpeopled is very interesting, because it means that he's really gone into another kind of dimension. The interesting part of this explanation from an anagogic point of view is that when Ulysses, after this journey of 5 months and more, to the left and to the south, reaches in view of purgatory, what he says is that this mountain, first of all, was so high he had never seen one alike, and also that their joy very soon was transformed into sorrow, because what happened is that a very strong force coming from the mountain, from the base of the mountain, um, came to the vessel and made it turn around 3.5 times. After this, as God wanted, the ship got down into the bottom of the sea and closed itself upon them as a seal, as a tomb. And here the journey ends and the chant also ends. Let's see a little better what is the meaning of this force that comes from the mountain. The base of the mountain, which is the ascension to sky, is like in yoga, the tree, the inner tree also of paradise, that is the successive progression of the chakras from the root chakra, the base of the mountain, to the crown chakra, which is the sky, and particularly the lotus of 1,000 petals, or the candida rosa at the end of paradise, represent this higher chakra. So the force that should actually go through the chakras, but is not direct until we are in the terrestrial paradise. She is despiralizing in hell and despiralizing to the right in purgatory, left side and hand side, which is expressly specified by Dante. The spiralizing force which Dante is really using in the right way, he's aligned with the force, so the force is pushing him in that direction, in a spiral way at the beginning and in a direct way through Beatrice at the end, explains that the awakening of Kundalini, which is coming from Beatrice, is indirect in the Inferno and Purgatory and done through Virgilio, and directly by Beatrice herself in Paradise, saying that Beatrice can be here interpreted as Kundalini herself. So she comes down to go back up. She is one of the poles of this big duality, the saving pole. And Lucifer, on the other hand, is the separating pole and the cause of suffering and of coldness and darkness. So this duality is expressed in this way, and Dante is traveling through this duality to become one. And at this point, when he meets the mountain, um, in the form of Ulysses, he is not ready to handle this force because he has not done the disidentification process that Dante does in hell and has not put yet all the goodwill that has to help the force to go up in the spiral way in purgatory. He is only going through a mental process, an arrogant and a pride of himself to go without doing this process of leaving the ego. And it is not with the ego that you can go beyond the ego. So you cannot be saved. And when the force comes, since he's not aligned with the force, he sees the force as enemy. The force actually shatters and abates the journey, which is not allowed in this way. This is the main message that all spiritual seekers should understand, and that I, as a psychiatrist, very often see in my patients. There are extraordinary states of consciousness, so-called altered states of consciousness, which derive from activation of this force in unprepared vessels, so to say, and which have to be prepared through disidentification and being accompanied. This is an allegory of the journey of Dante in the whole comedy, a psychic allegory, to understand the anagogic meaning of this process in their subtle bodies, in their consciousness. Because to be free from suffering and to arrive at the other end of the journey, what is needed is to change one's attitude, to die and to be reborn, and so to have a positive attitude towards this Kundalini activation, which has happened in these psychiatric patients, and that psychiatrists called psychosis and loss of contact with the normal, ordinary world.